Hi everyone, welcome to eZeLiving.com. Today's topic of conversation is about something that we're not unfamiliar to. You know what that is? Food. But here's something we want to talk about, and that is, what have we done over the course of a few decades where we've actually given up our rights to good food and we've allowed the corporations, the companies, the multinationals to make food for us. Now, one of the pioneers of this fight is Michael Pollan. He's making the argument that home cooking is not only a good practice to maintain and keep, but it's also incredibly valuable to our health, because this way we'll have control over what food we eat. Whereas if we give up this right to cook, which most of the multinationals want us to do, we're really forfeiting our rights to eating nutritional value. Now, Michael Pollan was giving a lecture some time ago in England, and we've got excerpts of this, and let's hear as to what he says, and you can pick up the key points of his discussion and his argument in that manufactured food is not good for our body. Let's take a look.
The story of where our food comes from, 75 years ago, you could not sell a book about that because everybody knew where their food comes from. They were directly involved with agriculture, or they knew somebody who was, and they'd been on farms. And so I've been very fortunate in that there's now this job description where you tell people what once everybody knew and get paid to do it. And then I leapt ahead because readers were asking me a lot of questions about health. So I started looking at the other end, the far other end of the food chain, which is to say what happens to our bodies when we ingest this stuff. What do we know about the links between diet and health, which is a very vexed subject. And I spent a lot of time exploring nutrition science, trying to come up with some answers. And that resulted in a book called In Defense of Food, and another one, a small book of food rules, as it's called, an eater's manual. But along the way, I kept getting these powerful hints that the middle link of the food chain, the one where the stuff coming off the farms is transformed into meals, was perhaps the most influential. And this was surprising to me because it seemed the one that was most obvious. You know, cooking, or food processing, as we call it when corporations do it. But I came to see that the kind of agriculture we have is very much a function of the kind of cooking we're doing. So that if you're letting fast food companies cook your food, you're going to have vast monocultures of corn and soya and animals in feedlots. And the reason is that fast food companies and other food processors drive down the cost of food relentlessly and force economies of scale and efficiencies, or what are called efficiencies, on farming. And I'll just give you one example. If you go to McDonald's, anywhere in the world, you will find French fries, and you will find that they're always made from the same potato, the russet Burbank potato. This is a potato from America that's unusually long and difficult to grow, but that's what they want, because when you're McDonald's, you like those red boxes with a little bouquet of very long chips. It looks really good. And so they insist that all their potatoes be russet Burbanks, and they further insist that they have no blemishes at all. There's a very common defect of russet Burbank potatoes called net necrosis. And you've seen potatoes with a little brown line sometimes, or spots that come through it. Well, McDonald's won't buy them if your potatoes have that. And the only way to eliminate that is to eliminate an aphid. And the only way to do that is with a pesticide called Monitor that is so toxic that the farmers who grow these potatoes in Idaho won't venture outside into their fields for 5 days after they spray. And then when they harvest their potatoes, they have to put them in these atmosphere-controlled sheds the size of a football stadium because they're not edible for 6 weeks. They have to off-gas all the chemicals in them. So you see, the desire for a certain kind of chip leads to a certain kind of agriculture. But the other thing on the health side, when I started learning about nutrition, that the scientific understanding of nutrition is still very primitive, but I learned that what mattered most about one's health was not necessarily the nutrients good or bad, that you were consuming or staying away from, or even the calorie counts. But what predicted a healthy diet more than anything else is the fact that it was being cooked by a human being and not a corporation. Corporations cook very differently than people do. They use vast amounts of salt, fat, and sugar, much more than you would ever use in your own cooking. And the reason they do that is those are three incredibly attractive and incredibly cheap ingredients. And when they're layered properly, as in a chip or various pastries and forms of junk food, they're incredibly addictive. And in fact, people in the industry, they don't talk about addiction in the food industry, even though they traffic in addiction. They talk about craveability. It's the same thing. And snackability is another term they use. It's a lovely word. Anyway, so I came to see that cooking has a huge bearing on our health. And in fact, there's been a lot of research in America that shows that even poor women who cook have healthier diets than wealthy women who don't. So you see the usual class bias in the quality of diet is overtaken by this fact, this key fact: who's cooking your food? And it is no coincidence, and in fact the link has been pretty well demonstrated, that as rates of home cooking decline, rates of obesity go up. And if you look around the world, the countries where home cooking is still healthy, that tradition, that practice, have lower rates of obesity.
So the three fundamental themes in his talk. Number one is don't give up the right to cook, because only you know what is going in your body. Number two is that corporations cook very differently than how we would cook. They cook very economically. They produce food in a very cost-effective and efficient manner, if we can call it that. And number three is because of the pesticides and the genetically modified elements, the chemicals that goes into these food that look fantastic, but they're devoid of any nutritional value. We don't know what kind of chemicals, harmful chemicals, we're exposed to. So consider these 3 points. Get a cookbook, get your own kitchen in order, and make delicious food. You're worth it. Thanks for watching eZeLiving.com, where you can find anything and everything lifestyle.